Welcome to DevJams. This is where we talk with developers who are doing interesting, innovative, inspiring things when it comes to images and videos inside of their projects, whether those are websites, mobile apps, software, or anything that is associated with all of these amazing digital types of projects. My name is Sam Brace, and I am the Senior Director of Customer Education and Community at Cloudinary. And in this episode, we are talking with Ian, and specifically talking with Ian about a great project that he has developed using a way to automate a lot of the optimization efforts for static sites with Python and Cloudinary. So we're going to talk with him more about ways that was possible, ways to be able to see how to use that same project in any of the work that you are doing with your own amazing image and video delivery focused projects. For this episode and all episodes of DevJams, we are joined with Jen Brisman. Jen Brisman is a technical curriculum engineer at Cloudinary and helps develop much of the developer-focused content for our Cloudinary Academy. So Jen, it is wonderful to have you for today's program.
Hey, happy to be here.
So tell me, Jen, why are we excited to talk with Ian today? Specifically, why are you excited to talk with Ian today?
Okay, well, I'm excited personally to talk to Ian because he's a Python developer. I love that. He has a non-traditional background and has an artist background as well. But really, what he built is really, really slick. This static site optimization app is awesome, and I can't wait to dive into it. Really, really helpful stuff.
Absolutely. And I think the great thing about a lot of the things that Ian is going to be able to show us today, a lot of it's going to be shown on his YouTube channel. So make sure that as you're going through today's live stream and episode that are taking place, make sure you're checking out all the great work that Ian's putting out here, because we're only diving into one of his projects in this episode. He has hundreds that you could be able to dive through that are part of this. And you can simply go to youtube.com/his handle, which is DevSprout. Also, as you can see here, when you take a look at the screen, he does have an active and growing Discord community for developers when they're sharing ideas and basically helping everybody to level up when it comes to their own development work, which also lets you see that private things we're going to be talking about with Ian today are tied to that, tying into some of the details around educating and empowering our developer communities. Also, everything that we're going to be talking about with his overall project is tied to his main GitHub repository and user. And everything that's tied to this project is Django sites, static site optimization. So make sure you're checking all that out. On top of all of this, please know if this is your first time ever checking out a Cloudinary DevJams episode, well, you are in luck. There is a cornucopia of material available to you with the many years of content that we have developed as part of DevJams, talking with inspiring developers who are building innovative projects, just like we're about to do with Ian. So check that out at cloudinary.com/podcasts or whatever you enjoy watching podcasts, whether that's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or literally the hundreds of other places that we syndicate this episode. On top of all of this, Ian and other community members are active in the Cloudinary community, which you can always check out at community.cloudinary.com. So if there's something that kind of tickles your brain and you want to be able to learn more about it, make sure you're diving in there to have those conversations, either at this main forum-based channel, or as you can see when we scroll down, there is also a very active Discord server there too. With all of that said, let's bring on our friend, Ian. Ian, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sam. Thanks, Jen.
So tell us, we've only referenced you by first name so far. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Ian.
So yeah, my name's Ian Schoonover. Ska like school, not Schoonover. A lot of people get that wrong. Yeah, I, like you said, have a non-traditional background in development. I've been in tech for well over 20 years, but actually doing computer programming, it's been more like 10. Doing it professionally, it's been more like 8 or 9. And so I started out in San Francisco doing like a part-time boot camp that segued into a full-time boot camp that segued into me actually helping the students there, getting hired on as a TA. One of the instructors took me with him over to South Africa for another TA type role. And when I returned to the States, I was brought on as an instructor for another boot camp. That's just one after the other, boot camp. And here I am. One of the boot camps that I worked with for the last 7 or so years, we introduced our students to Cloudinary. So that I don't know if that was my first introduction to it, but however I came across it, we brought it into our curriculum and we used it very heavily. And so I focused on it within that curriculum and also within the complementing videos on my YouTube channel. And here recently, as I have returned to the job market looking for my next gig, I've been looking very closely at Cloudinary because there's a lot of cool stuff happening over y'all's way. And in doing so, I've worked on a couple little projects, one of which is the one that we're going to talk about today. And I actually use Cloudinary for client work. So I've got clients' e-commerce applications with something like a Laravel backend or something with PHP, but also simpler, not static websites necessarily, but like WordPress type builds. And you all have a great plugin for WordPress. And I saw how it worked with one of my clients. And I thought, this is great, but I really wish there was something like this for static websites. Just really simple. Someone makes a portfolio or a blog or whatever it may be. And maybe they've already made it in the past, or maybe they have dozens of these for clients, whatever the case. And they think, well, I'd really like to integrate Cloudinary. How can I do that very quickly? Because sure, you can go through the dashboard and you'll have really nice interfaces for uploading, even bulk uploading and organizing and even transforming images there. But going through website by website might take a little while. I used Python, which is a great language for automation, by the way, to build this little project where all you have to do is take your static website with its locally accessed images, and you can zip it up, upload that zip file, and Python takes care of the rest. It goes through each file, HTML and CSS, and says, are there any images in here? If there are they located within this little file system of extracted files? And if they are, then I'm going to go ahead and send them up to your connected Cloudinary account, get the URL, add a couple little transformations, optimizations to it, and then overwrite your original files and send it back to you again in a zip file. So then you can just unzip it and do whatever you want with it. So that's a good starting point, a little bit of a boilerplate for additional optimizations, because there's so many fine-grained things that are going to be specific to each project. So this is just like a good way to get the heavy lifting out of the way so that you can really focus on the minutia of optimizing a website further.
So I got to ask, why did you choose Python and Django for this overall project? What's your tie to those programming languages and frameworks?
Yeah, so I'm actually more of a JavaScript developer by trade. Node.js on the back end specifically. I've done tons of work on the front end and all these different little fad libraries and stuff over the years. So you can't do any backend language, Ruby, PHP, whatever. You can do the same thing with all these languages. So why Python? I've been using Python in an academic setting here lately. I taught at a coding bootcamp for about 8 months in 2023, and they used Django. And that was my first experience teaching Python. I had used it for automation in the past, but it is just like, it abstracts the whole like coding side of things away from you and just lets you focus on exactly what it is you want to do. You don't have to worry about all the little, where's my semicolon, where's my curly brackets, all that is just removed. And you really get to focus in on, okay, I want to do this thing. And you just tell Python, this is the thing I want to do. And now, of course, with the help of generative AI, you can really dial it in and say, this is what I'm looking to do. And then here's your Python, and you can go through and clean it up. And it's just really easy to work with. So then Django is definitely overkill for this project. It could have been done with Flask or any number of Python frameworks or libraries. But at the same time, Django, even though it is batteries included and it has all this extra stuff, you can dial it down to whatever you want. So I was just like, I just need these specific features. Bam, bam, bam. It did everything I needed to do. And now I have it in production. So originally this was just a Python script where you had to actually have just a little bit of knowledge of how to set up an environment on your computer and run this within your static website. Not everybody has that knowledge. And so to remove that barrier to entry to use the project, I went ahead and utilized Django to put it in the cloud so that people could simply just upload a zip file, connect their Cloudinary credentials, and then be done with it.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And it all makes sense because you want to be able to give people an easy, lightweight way to be able to provide optimizations. And I feel like you've done this with this project. So I'm excited to see all the details of it. Before we get into it, Jen, do you have any questions for Ian?
Not questions, but I was just totally agreeing with you in my head that Python is very Englishy. It's a very easy entry language. I totally get why they teach it in boot camps. And then I really just love what you did, taking away that barrier to entry with having to spin up your own environment locally. And just some people might be scared away by that. But this is such a great way to show the power of Cloudinary as well for someone who's never used it, to just say, here, just zip up your project, put it into this static site optimization web app that I built, and you can just see how much more lightweight it makes your files. And then maybe even from there, once someone is evangelized, if you will, they can go use Cloudinary in other ways and build it to their needs. But this is such a great first experience with it for sure. Yeah, no questions or anything. I was just agreeing with so many things in my head. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's see how this works. If you could give us a demo of the functionality of what you built.
Absolutely. So what we're looking at here is a static website. Very simple. The images are pulled in from a website called Unsplash. They have free stock photography. We've got this header here that has this huge background image, and it is not optimized in any way, shape, or form. And so on initial page load, this is just going to destroy your page speed. And then we have this other image here, which it's this giant image. Someone just threw it into an images folder. That someone was me. And we've just plugged it into an image element in their HTML. There's actually one more page, the about page. And this is a very similar setup, except rather than using an image tag, this is a div using CSS with a class name, and it has the background image property set to a URL. I just wanted to cover, there's a bunch of different ways to include images. So I just wanted to cover some of the basic ones. And that's what's happening here. We have two ways of images being included. One is through the source attribute of an image tag, which we'll look at here in a moment when we look at the code for this page. And the other is by way of a external CSS style sheet with a background image property. We'll look at that as well. And so those two attributes, the source and the URL, are pointing to a location within this static site project where those image files actually live. And so that's going to be important because when we actually go through and parse this code, it's going to point us to where the real files are. We can take those files and we can send them up to Cloudinary. So if we walk through this, this is the HTML for the page we were just looking at. And if you look down here, you can see that we have the source tag for images home.jpg. So that's going to be the little blue image. And then if we go to the style sheet, we can see we also have this background image, two of them actually. One is for the about page that we looked at, and then the other is for the hero on both the home and the about. And so you can see this is pointing again to that images directory. If you think about the typical setup of the hierarchy of the folders in the static website, you typically have like your index.html, your about.html, team, contact, etc. And then you got some folders for things like style sheets and images. And so these images are all grouped together inside of an images directory. Okay. So then we have this web app that I built. And it's just a single form. You can see I've already pre-populated my Cloudinary cloud name, API key, and then the hidden API secret. And it's got some instructions. It has a link to Cloudinary in case you don't already have an account or you just want a quick way to get over there and get your credentials. And then a video walkthrough to a video on my YouTube where I just show you this is steps 1, 2, 3. So then if you click here, you will be asked to upload an image, or not an image, sorry, a zip file. And the zip file will be your static site. So you can see here, here's my static site. Here's the optimized version, which is the output of this whole process that we're describing. And then these are the unzipped or extracted versions. So once you do that and you upload, you will just wait while it does everything behind the scenes. And what comes back is an automatic download in your browser. And so then you'll unzip that zip file that comes back. It's called optimize.zip. And what you'll end up with is the exact same thing visually that you had before. So what's changed, of course, is what's happening behind the scenes. So if we look at the code for this, we can see immediately down here in this image tag that the source is now pointing to a Cloudinary CDN or content delivery network. So we're already getting the advantage of having our images on a CDN, which can mean that they are being cached in the browser. It can mean that they're being served closer to the users. Someone's over on the other side of the country or the world, they might have a server that's closer to them. And so they might have slightly less latency whenever downloading those images for the first time. This is especially important if we're talking about someone on a slow mobile connection or they only have limited data on their cell phone. So we want to be cognizant of that. So you can see inside of this URL here, we actually have a couple interesting things going on. F_auto, Q_auto, and W_auto. So while there is a plethora of things that you can do to transform your assets, your images and videos on Cloudinary, these are the three that I chose by default just as a starting point. So the F is just going to be for the format in which the image is sent back to us. So initially, you may not remember, but on the original, this is a JPEG here. And this down here is a JPEG as well. And so JPEGs are okay. And there's even a next gen format for a JPEG called JPEG XL, I believe, which I
That's right.
think someone that works at Cloudinary is actually a big driver of that project, which is really cool.
Correct. Yes.
And then there's WebP, which is another really commonly accepted next gen format. And when we talk about next gen formats, we're just talking about formats for images that they play more nicely with the web. Images traditionally are just for computers. And so they can be really big. And if you have, like, say, a really nice camera and it gives you a raw image and then you do some changes to it, but you still want to maintain as many of those original pixels as possible, then you get some of these formats like PNG and you have these beautiful images. Well, that's great until you get to the web where we're transferring data over the wire and it takes, 10 years for you to look at that beautiful image. So we have to get a happy medium between something that looks really nice and something that loads really fast. And so that's what next gen formats are doing for us. And so the F-Auto is going to pull whatever the most optimal format is. Now, we've uploaded the JPEG as a WebP, and you'll see that whenever we get to our Python code. So what we get back is WebP unless the browser gives us something different. So the browser is what's called a user agent. It's going to have some information that it sends to Cloudinary. Cloudinary on the back end is smart enough to know, is this a Chrome browser? Is this an Edge browser? What is it? And then it'll send back the specific file extension for that image based on that information.
Your F-Auto language is very strong, Ian. You said it very well.
I reviewed the documentation before this chat. I was like, I better get my ducks in a row.
What you're raising there is that because WebP is practically universal at this point, because Chrome has support for it, Edge supports, Firefox supports it. So it's to say, yeah, that makes sense. But the nice thing about F-Auto, as you're saying, is that it also acts as a nice fail-safe. So if it can't serve as WebP, then it will serve it as a JPEG, or it's going to say, maybe serve it as an AVIF or some other type of format. So it basically allows for you to continue to provide next-gen versions with F-Auto being there. But I like the fact that you went right for WebP rather than delivering as JPEG first, because the support for WebP is practically across all modern browsers from what I've seen.
Yep, exactly.
What about this QAuto thing? Your knowledge is strong. I want to say, what do you got?
Okay, so QAuto is talking about the quality. And so there's a couple different tiers when it comes to the quality with Cloudinary specifically. And it's basically eco or economy all the way up to best. And so with that analogy earlier about a really nice image and like a PNG format with tons of pixels, you can determine based on who your audience is, if you have some data about the usage of your application or your website, what format or what level of quality rather you're going to deliver these images in. And so QAuto is always going to start in the middle at a quality level called good, but it can also change to eco if it realizes that maybe the requesting user agent isn't able to handle something like good. So it has, again, that kind of dynamic ability on the back end.
Very nice. It's pretty solid. Compression is key here. And so I like the fact that we're doing this all, once again, based on all of the different characteristics of that original poll to say, what are we delivering to the user when they load the website? And F-Auto and QAuto are so dynamic in that way. And then, of course, WAuto being there, being able to dynamically resize the image based on the viewport as well. So there's a lot of sweet spot transformations that are here. And I think that also addresses the fact that, like, why aren't you setting specific widths and heights or aspect ratios? You're allowing WAuto to handle all of that for you.
Yep. So that's what's happening with WAuto. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. You'll see we're using the source attribute here. Ideally, this application in the future iterations will come back and say, hey, I saw that you had a source, but I'm going to also give you what's called a source set. And what a source set does is it provides a variety of images that can be used for differing viewport sizes. So if someone's on mobile, they're not going to get the giant 1920 by 1080 image. They're going to get the small, whatever it is, 430 by what have you, because they don't need that giant image. Their device is going to make it smaller anyway. Why not offload that to the back end so they don't have to pull all that mobile data over their device, because they may not have that data to begin with.
Absolutely. And it was also worth emphasizing that now, of course, now that you're delivering a Cloudinary, you're getting the F-Auto, the Q-Auto, the W-Auto transformation and capabilities we're pointing out. But of course, one thing that may not be realized by our audience is that you're now delivering things with content delivery networks too. So we have various CDNs like Akamai, like Fastly, that are being able to help work with Cloudinary delivered images and spread that across the web. By having just a static website, you're not getting any CDN action normally out of the box that way. So there's a lot of things that you're offering with this really nice, amazingly simple, but very cool transformation set that you're applying to all of the things that you're doing for a static site. So before we jump into it, Jen, what are you thinking here? Am I missing a big thing here?
Well, not missing it, but I guess what I'm interested in is now that we know once you've grabbed the images, what you do to optimize them, I'd love to see the code that goes through how you parse through and find the images and if they're embedded in different ways, like you said before. I'm just curious to see about that part, because that's, I think, where the brilliance comes in to the project.
Definitely. One thing I'll point out here that you'll notice with this HTML versus the original one we looked at is that we have lost our formatting. So that is a side effect of this script, is that I don't have, it's probably one line of code that I need to go back and add, but essentially everything is all the way back against the wall here instead of having the nice human readable indentation. That can be very easily fixed manually just by going into a code editor like VS Code and just doing a quick auto format with something like Prettier. Or hopefully what I'll do on my end is I'll just add one more line of code that will fix that. Talking about the code, let's head over to, we'll do it in the code editor. This is just an open source version of VS Code. And we've got let me back up and say that this is within a Django application. So there's a lot of files and stuff. If you go look at that GitHub repository that we looked at earlier, the Django static site optimizer repo, you're going to see a lot of different files. And I'm going to update the README to try and guide you to what you need to look at if you want to contribute to this open source. You don't really have to worry about that stuff if you're just utilizing the web app, but this is inside what is called a view. And so views in Django is where a lot of our logic happens. And then we map those to routes. And so if a route is like our homepage route, then when a user visits our website, they are redirected to this portion of code, executes the logic, and then it sends back some sort of response. So at the top here, we just have a bunch of bringing in these various packages or modules that we're going to use within the code. So just some boilerplate stuff and then some built-in things with Django that help us handle the request response cycle. So the meat and potatoes is going to happen all the way down at the bottom inside of this index view, which is mapped to the home route. And so we'll start here and then we'll just bounce around to these different functions. I've moved everything into its own function, so it's a little bit easier to digest what's happening in terms of steps. But essentially, there's two things that can happen if we think of like a fork in the road. Whenever someone visits our website, they're presented with the form. So that is a GET request to our home page, and that is handled by this else statement down here at the bottom, where we just say, hey, give us an empty form, and then render it in that index.html file. And so that's what you see when you first visit the page, is that form asking you for your Cloudinary credentials and your zip file. Once you fill that out and you submit it, you've just engaged in a post request. And so that's also handled by this same function that we're dealing with here. So this is saying, hey, if the method of the request is post, then this must be a post request and therefore do some different logic. And so the first thing we do is we just want to make sure that we actually got a zip file. That's handled on the front end as well, but we don't fully trust full front end validation. And so we do a double check on the back end just to make sure that we're dealing with what we expect to be dealing with and it doesn't take the site down. So if that is all working properly, the next thing we want to do is make sure that the form is valid. So is valid is just built in Django validations, making sure that there's nothing going awry here with the data that's coming through. So then we can pull what's called the clean data from the form. So these three values here, cloud name, API key, and API secret, are going to be the user credentials for their Cloudinary account.
Right.
So we can use those once we configure them with Cloudinary. And then essentially we're using Cloudinary's SDK, which is a developer kit, allows us to interact with the API without actually having to know all the endpoints and things like that. And so we just pass in the configuration values and that wires us up to Cloudinary. And then we'll use that here in a moment when we actually go do the image upload. And so if there's any issues with that, we want to let the user know by way of an error handling system. So that's all this code that you're seeing here. These next couple of lines essentially are just building a place for us to do everything that we're about to do with the rest of this logic. That is that we need a temporary directory where we can extract the zip file that was uploaded. And then we're going to parse through those files within that directory. And then ultimately, we're going to bundle them all back up into a zip file again and send them. So that's a temporary directory, and that's what's being created here. So then we have these three main meat and potato functions. We're first going to handle the uploaded file. That's that zip file. And what that means is that's where we're actually going to extract it into the temp folder. Then we're going to modify the files. So this is going to be the parsing of the HTML and the CSS looking for those images. And once we find them and we've uploaded them to Cloudinary, then we're going to return the modified files by way of a zip file back to the user. So let's start with the handle uploaded file. That's this function here. Very simple. We're just using something called zip file. Again, to your earlier question about why choose Python, there's just so many built-in libraries. Everything is so easy. You can just go, oh, what do I need that you don't have to create anything from scratch. I need to deal with zip files. Give me that zip file module. Everything's done for you. So this is really simple. It's just saying, hey, we have a temp directory. We passed it in. We have a zip file. We passed it in. Go ahead and extract the contents of that zip file into this temp directory so that we can actually go through and do things with that. Okay. And so if we go back here, the next thing that happens is we modify the files. So if we go to modify files, again, we're passing in that temp directory. We keep passing the temp directory that we created into these different functions so that they have a context for what we're doing. So then here you can see we've got a nested loop. We're essentially just walking through recursively any of the files and folders within this temp directory. And as we go through, we're just saying, is this an HTML file? Oh, if it is, then I need to check and see if there's any images inside of it. Is it not? Because if it's not, let's just double check and see if it's a CSS file. If it is, then I need to look through it and see if there's any images. And it just keeps doing that until it's done with everything. So it just goes drilling down through the project. So for each one of these, we are doing a couple things. We're extracting a file path for the file that we're dealing with. And if we determine that the file is HTML just by checking its extension or CSS, then we invoke either the modify HTML file or the modify CSS file, passing in the path to the file we've just identified, and just for context, the root directory, which takes us back all the way to where we have our temp directory. So if we go into modify HTML file, for example, which is actually just right here below where we are going to open the file and we're going to read through it. And so this is where we use BeautifulSoup. Now you'll see there's a difference between how I'm dealing with HTML files versus CSS files. I'm using BeautifulSoup here because it just has such a simple and intuitive syntax. It allows us to identify images and then manipulate them as needed. And so here you can see I'm saying for each image in finding all image tags within soup, soup being the contents of the file that we're reading, go ahead and extract the source attributes value from the image, and then go ahead and set the attribute of the image, source attribute, or the value of the source attribute on the image that we're currently looking at, to the return value of this function called handle image upload. Essentially, we're just walking through the HTML code and we're saying for every single image, check and see if it has a source attribute. If it does, see if it has a value. If it does, then that's pointing to an image. Take that image and upload it and then replace the current value of the source attribute with the value returned from this function. Ultimately, when all that is done, this fseek, fwrite, ftruncate stuff is just saying overwrite the existing file with these new contents that we put in place. And so if we want to look at the handle image upload, this is where we're actually dealing with sending our images up to Cloudinary. So we've already configured Cloudinary up at the top or down at the bottom in the index. And so we have access to it with something called upload. So we have the image path. We do that by joining the root and the source that are passed into this handle image upload. And we just do a quick double check to make sure that the image path exists. And if it does, then we know we have a file that we can then upload to Cloudinary. And so the response of the call to this upload method is going to be a dictionary object-like structure that has a bunch of metadata about this newly uploaded file. One piece of that information that's important to us is what's called the secure URL. And that is the URL to the CDN that has the image with all these transformations we're about to add to the URL. And it's secure because it's using TLS. It has HTTPS at the very beginning as opposed to HTTP. And so then we are going to extract the secure URL. Before we talk about that, I'll just point out that we do set the format to WebP here with this upload function. That is a feature of the SDK. And then when we get the secure URL back, because Cloudinary has a bunch of different ways that you can manipulate assets, The way that we're choosing to do it here specifically is simply by doing a text replace of the upload portion of the URL string with upload again, but adding on the F auto, which is the format, and the quality auto and the width auto as URL parameters. And so that's going to be part of Cloudinary's built-in URL API, where if you send a request to an image with these things in the URL, then Cloudinary is then notified, oh, this is how the user wants this specific asset to be transformed when we send it back to them.
I think this is what's cool about it from a Cloudinary user standpoint, because if they were to take this repository that you've made available and go ahead and fork this and say, I want to make sure that I'm applying maybe some padding with it, or they want to be able to add some sharpness or effects. This is where you basically give them a very easy playground to play with, to say, these are our optimizations that are going to be really helpful for you, but you can expand on these or remove them if the optimization isn't the focus of this overall project too. So this is clean. This is very easy to understand.
Oh, thank you.
The reason that is, just for anyone listening who doesn't know the URL structure that Cloudinary delivers in these secure URLs, is that /upload. That's going to be in every URL. So if Ian parses through or anyone parses through and finds that /upload/, they will be able to use that as a reference point and then add slashes after that with whatever optimizations you might want to change. But your URL will have that upload parameter in there every time.
Definitely. Yeah. And like we touched on earlier, this is like a good entry point for anybody that's new to Cloudinary, or even if you've been using it for a while. You could totally change the scope of this project, where if you did have some named transformations, which is essentially you go into Cloudinary's transformation builder, which is this really cool graphical user interface on their web app, where you can go in and say, these are the specific transformations that I want, and I'm going to bundle them all up into this singular name. And then you can just pass that name into the URL, and Cloudinary is smart enough to know that based on your account and the name that you provided, it knows to apply these different transformations. So if you had a ton of images that you were applying transformations to on a regular basis, you could modify this form to take in the name of the transformation, assuming you had multiple ones. And then you could have any number of images inside of a zip file, and you just change the code around just a little bit. And now suddenly you're able to apply any number of transformations to any number of images in a matter of seconds, as opposed to doing it manually yourself, going and having to upload everything and then say, okay, I want these ones to be that and these to be that. Now download these or copy these URLs. So really the whole point of this is just to save people time. So hopefully the existing functionality would allow you to save time if you're trying to deal with a static website, or if you see potential for it for some spin-off project, then you could just use it as a baseline to work from.
Absolutely.
So then if the image did exist and we did all this stuff, we return that secure URL once we've made those transformations to it. If the image didn't exist for some reason, then we're just going to return the original source back, so that it'll just go to the next file. And so that's what happens with the handling of image uploads in the case of the HTML. The other way is with CSS, which is actually going to use handle image upload as well, because the logic is the same. Once we've identified where the image lives and we've pulled the path to that image, whether it's from CSS or whether it's from HTML, doesn't matter. We still need to upload that file. The difference between the handling of or the modifying of the HTML file versus the CSS file is that with CSS, we are not using BeautifulSoup, because BeautifulSoup is walking through HTML elements. Whereas with the CSS, we just have this big string of text, and we're using what are called a regular expression to identify specific patterns within that text, specifically the background image. And then it points to the URL. And then you can see here the URL is just going to be anything inside of the parentheses for that CSS property. And so once we extract the match for that pattern, we know that we then have the path to the image that needs to be uploaded. And so here again, you can see we have handle image upload with the root, with the match, and then we're just stripping any backslashes or any quotes from it. So it's working similarly. We are tracking to see whether or not the file itself was modified just with the Boolean value. If we do end up getting some matches for some background images, then we go ahead and say that the file was modified. If it was modified, then we know we need to take the extra step to actually update that file. Otherwise, we just move on to the next CSS file, because not all HTML and CSS files within the project will have images that need to be dealt with, but we still
Right.
have to check them one by one.
No, absolutely.
I think the last thing, once we've looped through all HTML and CSS files and we've identified the sources of the images and we've uploaded them to Cloudinary, we've replaced the actual contents of the files that we've located, is to bundle this up and send it back to the user. This whole time while this has been happening, the user's just been waiting patiently in the browser. What we're going to do now is pass in this temp directory to this function create and send zip. What it'll do is it will identify the temp directory path. It'll also determine the name of the file that we're about to create, optimize.zip. It's going to walk recursively through that temp directory and bundle everything up into a zip file, which is going to have the exact same structure as the original zip file that came in from the user. And it's going to be sent back here as an HTTP response type of application zip. And so what will happen is when that gets sent to the browser knows, oh, just download this. So it's as if you had clicked on a download now link. And so you upload through the form, you wait a few moments, and then it comes back as an automatic download. You go check your downloads folder and there's your zip file. You extract it with whatever program you have on your computer for extracting zip files. And the contents of that file are going to be your newly updated website with all the updated URLs.
This might be like a super beginner question, but it's something that I've seen developers ask questions about. And since you've worked with tons of them in trainings over the years, is this zip aspect of it. Like I've seen it where sometimes they make mistakes here, where they forget to add a file or they zipped it incorrectly. Is there anything that you recommend just from a best practice? Like when you're trying to zip your static site together and apply it into an application like the one that you built, is there any best practices?
That is a good question. I haven't done a whole lot of work with zip files. I want to say this is probably maybe the second time I've ever had to do anything like this. Okay. So I'm relying very heavily on predetermined code that I found on the internet that says this is the way to do it. And then in addition to that, my testing of it. So I upload my stuff and when I get back, I say, is everything in there? If everything wasn't in there, then I would look into the code further and be like, where did I go wrong? Where is something missing? But what we're looking at here, just working through every file and folder within the directory that I want zipped seems to be working fine for me.
Yeah. And to your point, like, I feel like what it's doing is like, let's say that like you missed something, then that's just everything that at least that was part of the original zip file would be optimized because it was part of that original package. There might be something that's missed, but it's not going to create a failure by any means. But it is this is a sticking point that I've seen developers get into is like, how do I get that zip file to actually work the way that I want it to? But it seems like once they have it, then they're off to the races with what you provided to them.
Yeah, I would say if you're really concerned about it, like on a larger scale product, especially if you have a lot of users who are actually going to be consuming it, then at that point, you want to make sure that you have a lot of test cases. So if I upload zip file and zip file has this structure and has these number of files inside of it with these file names and so on and so on, and then I get back a copied version of it with whatever modifications, then I need to go through that copy and make sure that it has everything I expect it to have. So that's your typical, this is my input. When the output comes back, I need it to look the way I think it should. Otherwise, this test is failing.
Makes sense. And I like the fact that you have ones that are HTML and CSS based because, as we know, people are going to be doing things in different places depending on what they're comfortable with. So this is good that it kind of attacks both with what your project is set up.
Yeah. So this makes a lot of assumptions about people's projects, and that is that the project A is not using any CDNs. It's not using any uploaded files or anything like that. These are images that are included locally within the project, and there are no existing optimizations. So if someone has a source set already and it's already pointing to the 4 different versions of the files that are optimized for the specific screen sizes, then this isn't necessarily going to help them because it's actually going to skip over that altogether. It's only looking for the source attribute to begin with. In future iterations, if I have more time to spend on it or if anybody wants to contribute now that it's public, then doing something like that where you actually take the file and you utilize the power of Cloudinary where you can say, deliver this in these predetermined screen sizes. So I just assume that there's going to be a mobile and a tablet and a desktop and a really big desktop. So why don't I go ahead and just give you those 4 source sets out of the box for every single image that you have included inside your project? So that's like a task for the future if I continue working on it.
But to your point, I think that's where what you've done is frankly good enough for a lot of most projects. It's kind of like There's something that we practice a lot, the 80-20 rule. It's like you're addressing 80% of the use cases, especially when you're talking about like blogs, portfolios, things that are going to have a very clear use case to it. Whereas, but if you're talking like scaling this across like an enterprise level project, yeah, there's things that you might want to consider when it comes to getting the project to be more for them, but not you, Ian, to do that, but more like the person that's going to fork this or contribute to this. That's where they could add an adding to it. But you're hitting 80% of the use case. That we want to make sure that you're serving optimized stuff. That's a big aspect.
Definitely.
Of future iterations as well. Something I was thinking about now that we're really looking at how these static sites are being parsed through, I'm thinking about video because if it is just a source attribute or if it's a video tag or the same ways that an image would be embedded, that could address video. I suppose there are other factors such as if they're using a video player, if they're having a YouTube link or other ways that someone might have video on a site like this, just a simple static site. But I know how Cloudinary deals with video. And if it's really as simple as parsing through and finding it by the tag, I think it would be like, I don't know, 20 or less lines of code added to what you have here to address video. What do you think, Ian?
Yeah, totally agree. I have a separate project that I was working on where if you're a content creator and you want to create a course, one way that you could create the course through this platform I was working on was that you have all these videos for your courses. And when you upload the video, it automatically creates a shorter preview of the file. And then the users to the site can purchase the full version. If they watch the first 30 seconds, and they go, oh man, I really want this. Then they pay the X number of dollars and they unlock the full video. Part of that was uploading these local videos to Cloudinary. So you're totally right. The SDK is pretty powerful, especially the Python one for video upload. And so again, all you'd have to do is say, oh, do I have like a built-in HTML video player? And if I do, is it pointing to a video inside my videos directory? And if I do, then can I just upload it and replace it with this new attribute, the source attribute for the video? So you're totally right. It would not be a far cry to go from where we are currently to also including things like videos.
Yeah. And all the same optimizations we talked about, the F auto, Q auto, W auto. You could even add a G auto in there for gravity auto for those who know the Cloudinary lingo. It's not. Gravity is where Cloudinary uses its AI capabilities to find the most interesting part of the photo, or even if you want to drill down deeper, not just the most interesting part, but like a specific part that you can specify, like G gravity dog, if you want to find the dog in the video or whatever it is. There's a lot of cool AI capabilities Cloudinary offers with gravity. Another easy optimization to just tack on to that list. Yeah, really easily to how Ian wrote it.
Definitely. Yeah. When I was working with the video stuff, I was pleasantly surprised at not just how quickly the videos were uploaded, which was great, but then the optimizations that were built in with them coming back, they just play instantly and they're in great quality and they have this built-in video player if you want to utilize it and just all this cool added on stuff. So I think that would definitely be a cool feature to consider for future iterations.
For sure.
So thinking about this project here, you now have something that people can use today and you've demonstrated it. What were some of the roadblocks, if there were any, of like how you were able to come about this project? Were things you're like, if I were to build this differently today versus when I first started, I would do it in a certain way? Or if someone's trying to implement this and they're hitting something, you're like, oh, I anticipate that happening. Anything like that?
The way that I went about it originally was that I created it with a bash script. And it was just that you have this folder on your computer with your static website. And so then you just go in there and execute this bash script just by copy and paste this bash file into that folder. And then you run it and then bash goes through and says, all right, from where I currently am, I'm just going to just look through this recursively looking for images and videos. And then I'm just going to replace things within these files. And that was great, except you still have to understand bash scripting and how to run that script. What if there's some folder or file permission issues and you can't execute it? And the moment you add that level of complexity to the project, then you lose whatever % of people that would be able to use it if they don't have that pre-existing knowledge. And so now I was like, all right, I'll switch to Python. A lot more people know how to play with Python than perhaps with the bash script. And that was the version 1, was that you could just follow some, what I hope were clear instructions for running the Python script locally. But ultimately, even then, it was like, you know what? not everybody either has the existing knowledge or even wants to go down that path to try and deal with it. They're just like, at this point, I might as well just go sign up for an account, bulk upload my images, and then just start copying the URLs and adding transformations. And so I'm like, how do I actually make this useful? And that's where we ended up with the web app, with the form, being able to just upload the zip file. So really all you're doing on your end is just zipping your project, uploading it, and you're done. As far as roadblocks, that was essentially it for me. One thing I did do, and that I've done often in the past, is I try to over optimize initially. So rather than just get it working, I was like, I want it to read nicely and like to be modular and all this stuff, which is where it ended up ultimately with a little bit of refactoring. But before that, I was just trying to go from the local Python implementation to the Django web app implementation, and just pulling that logic from one to the other and thinking, oh, I'll just optimize it this way and blah, blah, blah. And I was getting tripped up over it for a while. And so then I was like, wait a second, like, just make it work. Just make it work in the new context, which is the Django app. And then once it's working, then you can do what I did here and come back and put everything into functions and make it read a little bit nicer. So more of a soft skill thing, I would say, just if you're working on anything, not necessarily this project, just anything that you're working on, it's always more important to have something that's working than something that reads nice but isn't working.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Amazing insights. And I think the one thing that I'm starting to pick up on that's actually a neat thing about the way that you've done this as well is because you are just uploading the original file, you're not transforming it in any way from taking it from a static site to Cloudinary. Is that then if I wanted to use that for other websites or other purposes, I already have an optimized version or at least original URL that's in Cloudinary, so I can deliver that to, let's say, a WordPress site now that might not be tied to your static site, because it's all from the same space. So it's using Cloudinary as a single source of truth for all of your images and videos that you're doing, and you're helping to get those uploaded quickly. If you have this path that you've developed, but then the amount of things that you can extend it into is huge too. So this is a nice little way to get things simply, like it's a nice uploader on top of what you have here too. This is great. This is really, really great.
Definitely. Yeah, I didn't think of it in that regard, but you're totally right. And that's like a huge problem for a lot of organizations is like in digital publications, for example. Before the days of GraphQL, it's like, how do we have 10 different publication websites that all access the same content? And so if you have something like Cloudinary for your media content, then it's essentially acting as a CMS that everyone can access, especially if you're working on a larger team or have multiple projects. Good thing to highlight there.
Yeah, and of course, and like the fact that you can put like tags and metadata and things like that, it makes it really easy to say what should go where and all of these things. So you're absolutely right. Like the concepts that people have probably touched of CMS media libraries, like they've seen, this is where you're really able to add a lot more value to it. But it's also where you don't have to worry of being like this little island where everything's in the CMS, but we can't get it out of the CMS. So that's a nice feature of what you've provided here too.
Thanks.
So Ian, one thing that I'm really excited about is, so we've seen this project, but what else are you working on? Like what else is Ian up to on top of just building really helpful web apps like the one that you've shown here?
Thanks for that. So yeah, currently I'm actually unemployed. Previously, I was working for a bootcamp remotely. And as I think most people are aware, tech is going through a bit of a low period right now, lots of layoffs and stuff like that. And let me say this, the same thing happened to me around the same time in 2022. So December 2022, I lost my job of 7 years, unfortunately. And you just come to a fork in the road where it's like, okay, well, you have a decision. You either continue working regardless of being paid, because isn't this what you are like passionate about to begin with? Or maybe not. For some folks, it might be a time for them to like transition to something else. For me personally, this is my bread and butter. This is what I love to do. And so finding little projects like this to keep me active, even though I don't have, something from an organization where they're saying, hey, this is what we want you to do on a day-to-day. This allows me to create, so I stay active with my coding skills and I'm learning new things. It also allows me to create content around it, so I can put things on my YouTube channel and, like you mentioned earlier, our Discord. And so then it starts conversations too. So I never would have thought that this sort of thing would bring me here. I just built this little toy app. I thought this is a cool use case for me. It gets me more familiar with Cloudinary. And the next thing I know, I have you folks reaching out to be like, hey, this is really neat. You should come talk to us. And it's like, well, I never would have thought that would lead to this sort of opportunity, which thank you, by the way. And so that's what I'm currently doing. I'm just continuing to follow my passion while also applying for jobs and looking for work. Building the Discord community. We do a lot of free stuff. Everything that I used to get paid to do, I'm just doing for free now to keep me sharp and to give back to the community. And everybody seems to be enjoying it. And we're learning a lot and having a lot of fun together. And so growing the YouTube channel, growing the Discord, and continuing to look for whatever's next. That's where I am now.
And you can see, so I'm highlighting Ian's channel. And of course, Ian, you have a lot more facial hair in your profile picture than you do today. But it is to say that the same guy.
Yeah, that's me.
And lots of great content here. So it's definitely where take the time to take a look at this and all the great work that you're putting out there to the world. And as you're pointing out, it's a way for you to stay up on the trends and keep up your development chops. But it's also where this benefits the developer community quite a bit, which I think is very important. Jen thinks is really important. And that's why we do DevJams too, is that we want to constantly be giving back and highlighting all the great things that the developer community is doing. And luckily, showing up Cloudinary and some of that makes me happy. So that's great. Keep it up. I'm really excited to see what you're doing. And on top of DevSprout, the YouTube channel, the Discord, is there any other spots where like if someone's like, I want to get a hold of Ian, how would they do it? Is there like, is LinkedIn, Twitter, what's your thing?
Yeah, great questions. I think as often is the case in some spaces, it can be hard to get in touch with people. I try to make myself very accessible. So one place to find me is the Discord, obviously. YouTube comments are tricky because it's just not a great interface for a continued conversation. Discord, you can join it. You can DM me directly. I will most likely respond. Or LinkedIn, you can find me, Ian Schoonover on LinkedIn. But yeah, reach out, connect with me on either of those platforms, Discord or LinkedIn. I'm almost always available to chat and I'm happy to meet new people. So if you're looking for me, that's where you can find me.
I love it. I love it. Ian, this was a great episode. And it makes me happy that you are making things simple, easy, and all it is just taking your zip static site, making sure it's optimized. And gosh, if there's not one Python developer out there, there's probably like a million. So like, it's just like, if this is an accessible, easy to understand language that you're making this all available through. Great work, Ian. Keep it up.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Jen, I gotta ask you, what do you want to take away from this thing? What did you hear from me? And that's your big takeaway.
Really, so many things. On a conceptual level, I just really resonated with a lot of points he made. He made a point about shipping imperfect products. If it's not perfect yet, still put it out there and then you can iterate and make certain versions and make improvements as you go. I loved that. I also loved something he said about work begets work. You never know. You put something out there, you never know what's going to come of it, what opportunities may come of it. And then he also touched on something I wanted to point out too at the end of the episode, which are name transformations. We briefly went over it, but really that would be the perfect thing to implement in this project if you do end up using his project or iterating on his code, because a name transformation is like a bundle of transformations. You can give it one code name and no one knows what all the transformations are that are in that bundle and you get to specify it. So that's a cool thing for anyone listening that might not know about name transformations. And then one more thing that I thought might be cool, just a takeaway or just something I was thinking about from the episode is it would be cool to do a side-by-side, I think, of a really heavy website that you put through this static site optimization app that he built, because we were just showing his example with just a few images. But if you had a static site with like hundreds of images or really big images and then did a side-by-side, I think that would just be like an awesome, powerful example to show how these optimizations make such a difference. But yeah, that was a chaotic takeaway word vomit, but there were just so many thoughts swirling around my head that I just...
You're excited. I get it. I totally get it. And I think this is where there's a lot of ways that you can augment a project like the one that Ian has gone and developed. So I agree. Like when you were asking questions about video, being able to say, what if you were to simplify some of the transformations by using name transformations, as you're saying, ways to suck in, let's say 20 or 30 different attributes and bring it into one simple transformation. There's lots of ways to do that. So I think the fact that you're excited by it, hopefully it's going to resonate with others that are watching this and saying, I want to be able to optimize my site too and do it simply. And also maybe be able to fork what Ian's great work has been and be able to make it their own in that case. Excellent points, Jen. To reiterate, make sure that you're checking out Ian's amazing YouTube channel where he does plenty of walkthroughs and instructional content for developers like you. That's going to be at youtube.com/devsprout. So DevSprout. That shows I can spell. And also point out that everything that we've talked about for the Django static site optimization project is tied to his main GitHub user account. And you can see all of that at NAX3T, which is actually Texan backward. So that's a neat little fun fact that we were able to learn about Ian too. Lastly, as we've said at the beginning of this episode, as we're stating at the end, all of these various episodes of DevJams are available always at cloudinary.com/podcasts, on top of the many different places that we syndicate this to. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and then also even on our own training site, which is the Cloudinary Academy, which you can always access at training.cloudinary.com. And our final point of making sure you know where to go is our Cloudinary community. That's going to be community.cloudinary.com. And this is where Ian and hundreds, if not thousands, of other developers are actively asking questions and helping each other to better understand ways to work with images and videos, particularly with Cloudinary. You can always do that. And then we do have a Discord server that is going to allow for you to extend many of those conversations there if Discord is your preferred way of communicating. Lots and lots of wonderful things that are available to you on top of what we have in today's episode. Jen, final thoughts. What's your big takeaway that you want to end on before this overall episode?
Yeah, I guess just that it is a hard job market right now. And if you are in a position like Ian's in, I think it's really awesome to be building stuff that you're not getting paid to do. Like keep building stuff, keep putting stuff out there. You never know who might find it. You never know what might come from it. And even people who are looking at Ian as a potential candidate in the future will see that he was doing all this and he was really busy while he was seeking jobs and building stuff and helping other developers. Like that's got to count for so much. Yeah. Keep putting stuff out there. It's a hard job market. Yeah. That's kind of the final note that I want to leave everyone with.
I like that final note that you're leaving on because I want to point out that Ian's not the only person that has ever been unemployed that's built something that's been on DevJams that's only become employed. I don't want to promise that, but it is to say that there have been cases like that. Thinking all back to episode 1 is where we had on Hannah, who had built a project in her coding bootcamp that used Cloudinary in a fun way. And then now she's one of the biggest and brightest stars over at Datadog. So it's to say that having these opportunities to be able to say, I want to test the technology while I might have some more downtime or maybe some time to be able to practice on something, it potentially can lead to opportunities to speak with companies or speak with employers that might have ways to be able to show off your work or maybe just be able to showcase how you understand it. So we get it. I thank you for addressing the elephant in the room. The job market is hard. And hopefully that people can maybe leverage avenues like this to be able to make their work a little bit more seen and be able to get people to recognize it too. So hopefully that's what you're getting at.
Yes.
Cool. Good. Okay. Good. All right. So on behalf of everybody at Cloudinary, thank you for watching this episode of DevJams. And we hope that you and all of the amazing developers that are working with images and videos today continue to use this as a way to be able to see the innovative, inspiring, interesting work that people are doing with images and videos on the web, mobile apps, and other amazing projects. Take care, and we will see you at the next episode.